بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Beloved brothers and sisters, honorable ulama, huffaz, hujjaj, mothers and fathers, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. كيف حالكم؟ Alhamdulillah. My beloved brothers and sisters, Alhamdulillah, as we resume our fiqh, we start a new bab, a new section in Kitab al-Tahara, the chapter of cleanliness. We are looking at tayammum, the dry ablution, this evening, inshallah. So we're starting the section, and this is a very important area. Many times we think that we are only going to apply this concept of tayammum when there is no water. That is generally the understanding. But tayammum is also applied, as we're going to look at this evening, when water can't reach a part of your body because of illness or injury. And so in those instances, when you have a wound, you have a bandage, something that prevents water from reaching that part, and we looked at wudu intensely over the last few weeks, the rulings of tayammum will come into play. Hence it is very important for a believer to have a clear understanding of tayammum. So tayammum is referred to, understood to be the dry ablution. You enter a state of purity through the absence of water. And it's a very strange phenomenon, and the ulama have written beautifully about tayammum, saying that the area of tayammum is not one based on logic. Because many people question, when you perform tayammum, which we will look at in the weeks to come, you don't use water, you use dust or soil. And so logically, you ask yourself, how do you become cleaner? By adding soil, whereas water washes away. And the ulama have said that tayammum, when one is honored by Allah to enact it, it is within the tradition of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is through Islam's submission to the laws of Allah, that we don't evaluate it from a logical perspective. But this is the affordance granted when there is no water available. So the Shaykh writes, and that is what we are looking at this evening very briefly, the asbab, the reasons that permit and bring about the performance of the tayammum, the dry ablution. So the Shaykh writes, asbabut tayammum thalatha. There are three reasons or moments when tayammum may be performed. The first one, which I think we are quite clear on, faqdul ma, the absence of water, when you lose water. Now, just on the first point, how do we determine that we don't have water? What are the measures in fiqh to warrant that you don't have water? If you go to your taps, your tap, let's say your water was disconnected because you never paid your bill. Do you fall into the category of those who can perform tayammum? This is an important consideration. If water is cut off to a certain part of the city, do you perform tayammum, or how far do you travel to access water? This a believer must be able to respond to, because in all likelihood you will want to purify yourself to perform salah. So when we go into the concept of faqdul ma, the loss or the absence of water, the ulama differ extensively on how far you need to travel to seek water. What all the madhahib agree upon is there should be a bahth, a search for water. The one madhab that differs from that slightly is the Shafi'i madhab, in which Imam Shafi rahimahullah writes that if you are 100% certain there is no water, within the masafa, the distance, then you don't need to search for it if you have surety. So in today's time, let's say the municipality releases a statement, a notice, the following areas are cut off. You receive the notice the morning. You go to your tap, no water comes out, you receive the notice, all these areas, these suburbs are cut off. Then in the Shafi'i madhab, you have surety. However, we now need to look at whether you have access to another source of water. If your neighbor down the road maybe has a borehole and there is water that can be accessed there, or your local masjid has a borehole and there is water available there, then of course you have access to water. So the distance that you need to travel, here we have a lot of opinions, but I'm not going to go through all of them. The distance that you need to travel in search of water starts from 200 meters and extends to 4.6 kilometers across the madhahib. The minimum distance is found in the Shafi'i madhab of 200 meters approximately. If we go into the text in the Shafi'i madhab, it indicates the distance that can be traveled when you call out for help, how far that can be heard from. And in another opinion, how far you can shoot an arrow. So the fuqaha, they summarize this to say about 200 meters roughly. In the Hanafi madhab, they indicate 1.8 kilometers should be traveled. The Hanafi madhab says even if you have heard there's no water, you should still search for it. You should still make the effort to go and look for the water. But condition one or reason one, there must be no water. If you can access water, in today, well, alhamdulillah, we have vehicles. So these distances were calculated in a time of walking and camels. That's the origin. Today, mashallah, you can hop into a beautiful car. It is very fast, alhamdulillah. It can travel amazing distances. In a short period of time, you can get through kilometers to access water. So the objective will always be to try and find water. That is the objective. If you cannot, and it's too difficult, I know when we had, the drought, and Allah, alhamdulillah, lifted that from our city. But when we had the drought, there were many times when parts of the city, because of the pumps within the city, certain water couldn't reach particular suburbs. And during that time, I received many inquiries, particularly from the elderly, saying, there's no water in my taps, no water in the area, and I don't have a car, and I'm elderly and I can't walk. But I have a little bit of water, a 2 liter to drink. Sheikh, can I make tayammum? Now, one must be able to respond to it. Okay, you can't travel, but you did mention the 2 liters of water, and we'll go into that shortly. So the absence of water warrants the performance of tayammum. Secondly, illness. If you have a sickness, and I want to actually read what the Sheikh has written, that if you have a sickness and water, if water goes onto that area where you have a wound or there's an illness, and you fear the following, then you can perform tayammum. You fear harm to your life or to that limb. That's part one. Part two, you fear that you can become disabled. Part three, you fear that you can become seriously ill. The fourth, you fear that the pain will increase. By adding water, you fear pain will increase. 5, you fear that your sickness will be prolonged as a result of adding water. And 6, you fear that there'll be a jolt of pain as a result of the water being added. And then lastly, you fear that the water will change the condition of your skin because of it being added. So if any of those 7 areas exist your fear. You injured yourself, and you now worried, if I'm going to add water to that limb, to your arm or your hand, whatever part it might be, one of those 7 things would arise, or even a combination of them, then tayammum is permissible to replace only that limb. So if you have access to water and you're performing wudu, and so we take the example of the cast. Your arm is in a cast, right? And in all likelihood, perhaps you never took wudu before your arm went into a cast. You have a cast, and now because water can't reach that limb, which is a condition of wudu, it's a condition, you must fulfill it. Then, to replace the water reaching the limb, you perform tayammum for that, even though you have access to water, right? So, if you ask your doctor, what if I put my arm underneath the tap and the water can go in there? You try and get a technicality, and the doctor would say you might worsen your state. So you seek medical advice. If the doctor says, no, that's going to worsen it, then it goes into this category of illness. And then thirdly, you only have a little water that can sustain yourself or certain animals. We'll go into those animals next week, inshallah. So if you have, so that elderly person who asked me a few years ago, I only have this 2 liter of water. That's it. There's nothing in my taps. Should I use that 2 liter of water to perform wudu, or should I keep it for drinking and perform tayammum? What do you think the answer is in fiqh? Ajik-san? Perform tayammum. And how would that fatwa be reached? Well, this was an elderly person. And if you wanted to know, a question I had was, do you have a child or someone that can bring water to you? And they said, no, there's no one who can bring water to me. And I said, okay, so you can't travel, you elderly, no water accessible, it's confirmed there's no water in your area, the awqat are upon you. So in this, and you only have enough water to sustain yourself. I asked the person, when would you get more water? And they said, okay, the son is coming back from travel the weekend, they'll get more water at that stage. So then tayammum can be applied. But if that person said, no, mashallah, my neighbor is coming home tonight, they're going to bring me a 5 liter, they've said so, I put money in their account, whatever, khalas, that's a different area. Then we know there's water coming. Then we could bank on, okay, maybe you only need, 500 mils of water, so technically to perform your wudu. So if you only have enough water to sustain yourself or even an animal, then you can perform tayammum. So we conclude as an introduction to the section on tayammum. Tayammum is performed when water is not available, and if we aggravate an illness or sickness, that would warrant the performance of tayammum in substitution of that limb that could not be reached. Any questions? Alhamdulillah. Wa sallallahu wa sallam alayhi wa rabbil alamin. Shukran.